He's a nationally syndicated columnist and senior editor at The Federalist. He has written a book just been released with a fascinating title called The People Have Spoken and They Are Wrong, with this subtitle, The Case Against Democracy. David, welcome to today's issues here on American Family Radio.
That's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Tell us, we want to jump into the book here, but tell us a little bit about yourself and about your work at The Federalist, and then what led you to write this book.
Well, I mean, I typically write about political issues, but also cultural ones, and The Federalist is a site we started around 6 months ago with what I think are some top people, and it takes a deeper dive into some of the cultural issues, sort of maybe reaching out to a younger demographic than other conservative sites, I guess. Because I think most often we think, when you think about politics, you don't realize that it really pulls in all areas of culture, so we try to do that. The book is something I've thought about for a long time. I think that Americans put too much emphasis on the word democracy and the idea of democracy, and I wanted to try to at least dispel some of those myths, or at least the myths that I see.
You know, it's a fascinating and even a provocative way to put it. It says right on the front cover, the case against democracy. And I'm sure a lot of people would hear that and go, what? What? America's a democracy. What are you, un-American? So explain yourself. What's the case against democracy?
My wife asked me if my next book was going to be an attack on kittens. So, yeah.
Right.
Democracy is simply a process. It's a reflection of the morals and the ethics that a community or a country has. So American democracy has done, and we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic, but our democratic institutions have done pretty well because we have a very strong constitution that protects the rights of people, the religious freedoms of people, the free speech freedoms that people have, and so forth, rather than just bending to the whims of whatever most people believe or are thinking. So that's one reason. The second reason is I have a real problem with the philosophical idea, I guess, that if most people say something is right or moral, that is right, that it is so. So I come at it from both ways. And then thirdly, you can just look around the world and see how democracy works elsewhere. It doesn't, because of the things I think I just mentioned.
Well, David, what's the difference between democracy? I mean, that word is just thrown around. Sure, we live in a democracy. What's the difference, in the way you put it, between a democracy and a constitutional republic? Well,
we have a constitution that sets up a way of governing that diffuses democracy, so that for instance, the people of California and New York can't tell the people in Arkansas or Oklahoma, just because they're smaller states, how to live their lives. The federal government has its functions, and then even locally you have senates and the House and the governor and all these things. You have a lot of competing interests, so that the majority doesn't just overrun the minority. And then you have courts that stop democracy as well, or should at least, when democracy is undermining the Constitution, which is a lot more important in my view than someone's vote. So I think we don't often express that our freedoms are more important than being able to tell other people how to live.
Talking to David. David, how you pronounce your last name again?
You guys got it right. It was Harsanyi.
Harsanyi.
Yeah.
Okay, Harsany. You know, I'll bet if you did a man on the street interview and you ask Americans, just walking down the street, is America a democracy? Probably 90% of them are going to say yes. The other 10% are going to say, huh? And so because they don't even know where they are at that moment. They're texting, so they don't have time to listen to your question. But actually, America, the United States of America, David, is a constitutional republic. We're not a true. Now, maybe you could argue that's a form of democracy, but we're not a true democracy. We are a constitutional republic, and our founding fathers did that deliberately.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you read the Federalist, well, first off, the word democracy is not anywhere in the Constitution. But when you read the Federalist Papers, and I'm not going to pretend I've read every one, but if you read the highlights, and especially number 10, you see why they were nervous about it. Now, some founders were more nervous about democracy than others, but the idea at least was that if we had democracy, the people here would share a certain moral understanding of the world, that it would work for them. Because I think it was Adams who said, if the people aren't moral, then democracy will die. I mean, he said it much more eloquently. I forget exactly how. But so I think it's important to remember that as far as we had democracy in this country, it was because we shared a certain belief system. And you mentioned a man on the street. I have a large, I'd say a third of the book is devoted to the voter. Democracy doesn't work sometimes because voters are not educated. Voters, there are people who don't know anything, a lot of them, when you look at some of the polling. And there are people who know a little, and they're really passionate, and that's problematic. And then there are people who know plenty, and they're also pretty dangerous sometimes. So I argue, in essence, that the vote shouldn't mean as much, not that people should be obsessed with politics. I mean, how can a normal person know what's going on in Washington when you have 2,000-page bills all the time? It's difficult.
David, we hear a lot about gridlock in Washington, but you've got a chapter called Gridlock Saves the Republic. So is gridlock good or bad?
I think gridlock is the great equalizer for the people. Everyone cries about gridlock. I saw a poll, I think 96% of Americans think Congress is doing a bad job. I think Congress, inadvertently at least, is doing a great job. I mean, it stopped. Listen, the country went to the left. We had a president who was elected, and he passed in Congress a bill that was seen by many to be a very liberal bill, Obamacare. And then there was a reaction to that. That's the organic way government here should work. And now we can't agree on stuff, so nothing gets done, and that's good too. Government isn't everything. People treat it like the church, that as the sort of place where morality springs and everything that we need, gives us everything we need. But that's not really, shouldn't be the case, at least. So I'm happy when there's gridlock, because I think it makes people look towards their communities and things like that. Government has pushed civil society out of our communities in a big way, whereas, and I know, obviously I'm talking to the right people, but you had churches helping communities, and they still do, but you have government sort of intruding on that role in a big way that I think is dangerous for the country.
Okay, so we come to the, totally with you on all that you just said. You come to the conclusion of your book, and I got to say I love it. I've never heard anybody say it this way. It just simply says, conclusion, don't vote, which kind of goes against a lot of the other stuff we hear and even talk about here on the air. So what do you mean by that?
I mean that if you, listen, it's a little bit weird to say this to people, because we're always told that everyone should vote. In fact, there are some people that say that it should be mandatory to vote. I think that's a terrible idea. I think too many people vote who don't know what's going on. And I think if you don't know what's going on, your responsibility is not to vote. And too many people think that they need to vote no matter what. So I just think, let me be honest, I'm not trying to hide this. I don't vote all the time. I mean, I don't believe in the lesser of two evils unless it's really very evil, the other choice. And also, sometimes I don't understand what's going on locally, for instance, and I just don't feel compelled to vote. I think that we vote too much, that it's too ingrained in our national consciousness that everyone needs to go out and vote. So I know that's sort of counterintuitive, and maybe I'm trying to be provocative on purpose, but the thing is, I just don't think the vote's as important as everyone else. How I vote for president shouldn't change the way I live my life so dramatically as it does right now, and that's the problem. So in the end, I think government's too big.
Well, go ahead, Ray.
I wanted David to follow up with you on that, because some people, when we talk about electing the president, they want to do away with the Electoral College and go to direct popular vote nationwide. But the founders had something in mind, didn't they, when they set up the system, so that we were electing electors instead of directly electing the president? What are they trying to get at by setting it up that way?
Yeah, I mean, also on top of that, and I'll answer that in a second, is that the senators weren't directly elected by the people either. You had legislators electing the senators, even adding another layer another diffusion of direct democracy there. And you do that or they wanted that because I think they were nervous that big states at the time, Virginia and Massachusetts, would push around smaller states. And you see that happening now all the time. Obamacare is mandated to every state. It doesn't matter that the people within the state didn't want it because it's a huge federal project. And we have one after the next. We have it with education happening now. And listen, I just think the parents in Mississippi have a different needs than the parents in Vermont. And I think that we have to honor that. And I think it's what makes us a strong nation, because we realize that we have to be one, but that we're also diverse, and not diverse in the way that the left often says, but actually diverse in the way we live our lives. So listen, you can say that, I don't want to force someone to bake a cake at a gay marriage in Arizona, even if everyone agrees with it. Even if I agreed with gay marriage, I wouldn't want that. So I think that we have to respect the way people live in their communities.
We're talking to David Harsanyi, Harsanyi. The book is called The People Have Spoken, and They Are Wrong. The Case Against Democracy, published by Regnery. And, I'm the same way, David. I don't vote. If I don't know what I'm voting on, I don't vote. Now, I will either I know about the issue or I know about the candidates, or I ask somebody I trust before I go vote. You tell me, you keep up with this. What's this all about? Which way are you going? At least know that. But if you're uninformed about something, then do not vote. I agree with you because you're casting a vote out of ignorance, and that's never a good idea. Let me ask you this. So you would describe yourself as sort of a conservative / libertarian. Is that what you are?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I mean, I'm a libertarian, but how can you say? I mean, I'm not crazy libertarian. I mean, I realize that there are
right. You think you're not an anarchist?
No. I mean, I want the rule of law, and I realize that not everyone sees the world as I do. I just think in today's world, that's the best sort of system that would allow people to live their lives in the way they want.
Yeah. The federal government has gotten so big over the last 60, 70 years in this country. It was never the founders' intention. In fact, it was the founders' intention that the federal government be as small as possible, and certainly to avoid centralized power in the U.S., because that leads to trouble and problems and a loss of freedom and liberty. The founding fathers knew that, but here we are, 70 years, 80 years of morphing. We've come to this point where now the federal government has a huge role. I mean, what do they employ, like 10% or 20% of the public?
The largest company and the largest employer in the country.
Yeah, I mean, and then we combine that with all the social programs and things that they do. It has an enormous role to play in American life. So, and even to the point of controlling the states through money,
right.
Because a lot of people don't know, a lot of the states depend on the federal government sending them money to make their budgets, don't they?
That's a wonderful point because of one thing, they can print money. So
right.
Most states have to balance their budget with actual dollars, tax revenue.
Yes.
Whereas the government, the federal government can just continually borrow money. Now, again, I'm not even going to talk about the Federal Reserve and those things. Frankly, I don't know the answers to that, but I do know that the federal government bribes states to participate in all kinds of gigantic programs because they need money, and that's bullying and bribery in a way. And it's very difficult even for people who don't like federal government, Republican, conservative governors, to say no.
No, that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
A long time ago. Even conservative Republicans now, I mean, they a lot of them they make speeches maybe that talk about downsizing government, but for all practical purposes, nobody's doing anything in Washington to downsize government because, well, a lot of Americans, even conservative Americans, have gotten used to getting things from government.
Right, and Yeah, they say they don't like it, but then they like their thing. So everyone has their own thing they like, and that adds up, right?
How do you? I know you're not an economist necessarily, and you want to get into the Federal Reserve thing, but I ask smart people like yourself this question from time to time. How long can you keep printing and borrowing money? Do you think before, or is there a day of reckoning? Can you, since you got a printing machine, can you just print from now to infinity?
No, well, probably not. I mean, we talk about the debt, which is at $17 trillion.
Right. Nobody cares about that, though.
Right, and that's not even it. I mean, when you take in and think about future liabilities, you're talking about...
no, we're toast.
You're talking about $1 bajillion or whatever.
No, we're toast. If you believe